They say a mother's smile after hearing her baby's heartbeat is the purest thing on earth. That morning, I believed it. 3 years of trying dozens of negative tests, 2 heartbreaking miscarriages, all of it melted away when the doctor placed the ultrasound photo in my hands. On the screen, a tiny figure kicked and waved. A boy. My son. I clutched the photo to my chest, trembling with joy and relief. Dr. Carter smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Gladys. Everything looks perfect. Strong heartbeat, right on track. I think this is your miracle." Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. Tears stung my eyes. I thought of Hudson, my husband, my rock through every loss. The man who had held me when I broke down, who whispered it wasn't my fault, who promised that one day it would happen for us. Today, it finally had. I couldn't wait to show him. I imagined his face lighting up, his arms spinning me around, his voice cracking with joy. I floated down the elevator, ready to hand him the photo and say, "Hudson, we're having a boy." The doors slid open. I scanned the crowded lobby, expecting to see him pacing by the windows like he always did when he was nervous. But he wasn't there. Maybe he'd stepped outside for air. I smiled at the thought of surprising him. That's when I heard it. His voice. Low, familiar, intimate, coming from a small alcove by the elevators. My heart stumbled. I froze. The timing couldn't be better, Flo. She's completely focused on the pregnancy. She has no idea. Flo. Florence. My best friend. My maid of honor. The woman who had held my hand through fertility treatments, who brought me soup when I couldn't get out of bed, who cried with me when I finally got that positive test. My chest tightened. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the ultrasound photo so hard it bent. "Hudson." "I'm not sure," Florence whispered. "She's so happy right now. Maybe we should wait until after. After what? After she has the baby. After I'm tied to her forever." "No, Flo, I can't do this anymore. I want a family with you. With our baby." The floor tilted beneath me. Our baby. The photo slipped from my hand and scattered across the polished tiles. I collapsed onto the cold floor. My breath ragged, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the whole lobby could hear it. Florence's voice cracked. "But she's my best friend. I feel awful. She'll understand. She always does. That's the problem, she's too understanding. Too soft. That's why this marriage has been dead for years." His words sliced through me. Images flashed in my mind. Hudson working late, coming home distant and distracted. Florence showing up every morning with coffee and concern. None of it had been kindness. It had been strategy. I wanted to scream, to confront them, to tear away the mask of lies. But instead, I covered my mouth with shaking hands. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "The world will eat you alive if you don't learn to bite back." For the first time, I understood exactly what he meant. The woman who walked into that ultrasound appointment was gone. Dead. And the woman who picked up those crumpled photos from the hospital floor, the one smoothing out each crease with steady hands, was someone new, sharper, colder, ruthless if she had to be. I stared down at my son's tiny form in black and white, innocent, perfect, a baby boy who deserved protection at all costs. When I finally stepped out of that hallway, I put on the performance of a lifetime. The glowing, happy, expectant mother everyone expected to see. A smile on my face, laughter in my voice, joy in my eyes. But beneath it was something Hudson Smith would never see coming. A plan, a storm, and a promise that before this was over, he would learn the price of underestimating his wife. Hudson was waiting by the window when I walked back into the lobby, exactly where I had expected to find him before everything shattered. He glanced up from his phone and plastered on a smile, sliding his mask of the doting husband into place. "There she is," he said brightly, crossing the room to pull me into a hug that now felt like ice against my skin. "How did it go?" "Everything all right?" I forced my lips to curl upward, my voice steady sweet. "Everything's perfect. Hudson, we're having a boy." For the briefest second, his face faltered, surprise guilt. something sharp flickering across his eyes before he smothered it under that same charming grin he'd always worn. "A boy," he repeated, hugging me tighter. "That's incredible. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me." To anyone else in that lobby, we looked like the picture-perfect couple celebrating the happiest day of their lives. But to me, every word, every touch, every smile felt like a performance, staged for an audience I could no longer see. And for the first time, I wasn't an adoring spectator. I was the actor who knew the script and had already decided to rewrite the ending. The car ride home was torture. Hudson chattered about names, about nursery colors, about how thrilled his parents would be. I nodded, laughed at the right moments, even touched his hand on the gear shift like a loving wife should. But inside my mind was racing faster than the car on the highway. Every sentence he spoke was another brick in the wall of lies he'd built around me. Every smile he gave was another reminder of the betrayal I had overheard. I knew I couldn't confront him. Not yet. Not when all I had were fragments of words and the memory of Florence's guilty whisper. If I wanted to protect my son and myself, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. I needed a plan. That night, while Hudson claimed he had emails to catch up on in his study, I sat at my vanity, brushing my hair with slow, careful strokes. My reflection looked calm, radiant, even like any expectant mother savoring her glow. But behind that glass, I saw something else, a woman who had finally grown her edges. I remembered the way my father used to play chess with me when I was a girl. "You don't win by rushing the board," he'd say. "You win by patience. By anticipating every move your opponent might make and setting traps they don't see until they've already stepped into them." Hudson thought he was the strategist. He thought I was too naive, too fragile to question his late nights, his excuses, his so-called best friend who had somehow become a fixture in our home. He thought I would crumble under betrayal, that grief would drown me before I could fight. He was wrong. I put the brush down and picked up my phone. My hands didn't shake this time. I downloaded a recording app, created a hidden folder, and slid it between innocuous icons where Hudson would never think to look. Then I set it on the nightstand, tested it with a few words, and smiled when it played back clear as day. From that moment forward, nothing in my house would happen without me knowing. The next morning, I played the part of the affectionate wife. I kissed Hudson goodbye, packed him a lunch, even reminded him not to forget his umbrella in case of rain. He looked at me like I was the same trusting woman he had always manipulated. He didn't see the phone in my apron pocket recording every word of our kitchen conversation. As soon as the door shut behind him, I opened our joint bank account on my laptop. Hudson had never been careful with money. He assumed I was too busy with appointments and homemaking to pay attention. But numbers don't lie. Hotel charges on nights he swore he was stuck at the office. Jewelry I had never seen. Dinners for two at restaurants we had never visited together. Each line item was another dagger in my chest, but also another piece of ammunition in the arsenal I was building. I created a folder titled Baby Planning and filled it with screenshots, statements, copies of receipts. If Hudson ever suspected, he would see the title and assume it was for cribs and car seats. He would never guess it was the blueprint for his downfall. That afternoon, Florence texted me like she always did. "How are you feeling today? Want me to bring lunch over?" The sight of her name on my screen made my stomach twist, but I forced my fingers to type back, "Feeling good. Maybe tomorrow. Resting today." Her reply came instantly. "Of course, rest is important. Love you. Love." She signed her betrayal with love. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, then slid the phone into my pocket. If she wanted to keep playing the role of caring friend, I would let her. In fact, I would encourage it. Because every visit, every conversation, every false smile was another chance for her to slip up. Another chance for me to catch her words on tape. That evening, Hudson came home with grocery store daisies, the kind he used to bring me in college when he was broke, but wanted to look romantic. He kissed my cheek, his eyes searching mine for some sign that his performance was working. "It's been a long week," he said. "I thought we could spend Saturday looking at baby furniture. Maybe make a day of it." I smiled, inhaling the faint, tired scent of the flowers. "That sounds wonderful." He didn't notice the tiny recorder still running in my pocket. By the time I slipped into bed that night, my heart no longer raced with fear. It beat with something steadier, sharper, determination. Hudson and Florence thought they were building a future together on the ashes of my marriage. But what they didn't know was that the fire they had lit had forged me into someone new, someone who didn't just survive betrayal, someone who planned to weaponize it, and when the time came when I finally played my hand, they would never see it coming. By Saturday morning, the daisies Hudson had brought home were already wilting in their vase. Their drooping petals were the perfect metaphor for our marriage, pretty on the outside, lifeless underneath. I stared at them as I sipped my coffee, rehearsing the role I was about to play. Hudson came into the kitchen, tie-loose hair still damp from the shower. He smiled as if nothing in the world was wrong, as if he wasn't plotting to trade his pregnant wife for her best friend. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay? Like a baby." I lied smoothly. In reality, I had spent half the night scrolling through Florence's old Instagram posts, cross-referencing dates with Hudson's credit card charges. My case against them was growing stronger by the hour, but I knew evidence alone wouldn't be enough. I needed them to slip. I needed them to reveal themselves in ways they couldn't explain away, so I started planting traps. Over breakfast, I twirled my fork through scrambled eggs and said casually, "I was thinking about names. Maybe we should use a family name. How about Theodore after your grandfather Hudson froze?" His grandfather had been a cruel, bitter man who haunted his childhood. I knew the suggestion would land like a punch to the gut. Maybe something else, he muttered quickly, taking a gulp of coffee. I hid my smile behind my mug. First trap sprung. His reaction proved he was already on edge, too rattled to mask himself. Later that afternoon, while we walked through a baby furniture store, I dropped my next line. "Wouldn't it be fun if Florence came shopping with us one weekend? She's decorating her nursery, too. We could make a day of it." Hudson's knuckles whitened on the handle of the stroller he was pretending to test. "Actually, I think it might be awkward. She's single. Watching us shop as a couple might make her uncomfortable." I tilted my head innocently. "Single, right? Poor Florence. Still, she's been so supportive. I'd love for her to be part of this." His eyes darted away. He knew what I was doing even if he couldn't call me out on it. The tension in his jaw told me I was pressing the right buttons. That night, Florence texted, "Can I come by tomorrow? I miss you." I typed back, "Of course." Lunch. When she arrived, she carried a bakery bag with my favorite muffins, her smile bright but brittle. Her eyes darted around my kitchen like a thief casing the place. We sat at the table sipping tea. I rested my hand on my belly and said softly, "The baby's been so active lately. Dr. Carter thinks I might go full term this time." A flicker of something fear, maybe even disappointment crossed her face before she caught it. "That's wonderful," she said, voice too quick, too high. I let the silence stretch before leaning in, voice gentle. "Florence, can I ask you something personal? Have you thought about what you'll tell your baby about the father someday?" Her mug rattled against the saucer. I'm not sure yet. It must be hard," I said sympathetically. "Children are curious, and with our babies so close in age, they'll probably ask questions. I just hope it won't be awkward, one child with a father present, the other without." Her face drained of color. She stammered something about complications, about situations never being simple. My recorder, tucked under a dish towel on the counter, captured every syllable. As the afternoon waned, I laid my final trap. I reached across the table, touching her hand with the tenderness of a friend. "Florence, you can tell me anything. Whatever secret you're keeping, whatever burden you're carrying. I'll understand." Her eyes brimmed with tears. For a moment, I thought she might confess everything. Instead, she whispered, "I made a mistake with someone unavailable." "I wish things were different." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Not enough to win in court, maybe, but more than enough to destroy her reputation with the right people. I squeezed her hand gently and smiled as if I believed her half-truths. "I'm here for you," I said sweetly. "Always." But inside, I was cataloging every slip, every tear, every crack in her composure. She was unraveling, and soon she would snap. That night when Hudson came home, I mentioned casually Florence stopped by. She seemed upset. "I think she's having a hard time with the pregnancy. I even asked her who the father might be." Hudson's fork clattered against his plate. "You shouldn't speculate about her personal life," he said sharply. I tilted my head eyes wide with fake innocence. "I didn't speculate. I just told her I worry she might be hiding something. You know, guilt can make people secretive." His face paled and he left the table without another word. I smiled down at my plate. Trap 3. Successful. I went to bed that night with a sense of calm. My web was tightening around them strand by strand. They thought they were in control. They thought I was still the soft, trusting wife. But every innocent question, every gentle smile, every friendly conversation was a dagger carefully hidden beneath velvet. And when the time came, I wouldn't need to stab. They would cut themselves. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long golden stripes across the bedroom floor. Gladys lay still, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly, her mind already racing ahead. Sleep no longer came easily. Every time she closed her eyes, Hudson's voice at the hospital echoed back his cold calculation about the baby, about Florence, about erasing the life they had built. If Hudson believed she would collapse quietly into despair, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. When Hudson left for work, kissing her cheek with his well-practiced mask of affection, Gladys waited until she heard his car pull out of the driveway. Then she moved quickly. The laptop was waiting on the kitchen counter, the same one they had once used to search for fertility clinics and baby cribs. Now, it would become her weapon. She logged into their joint bank account, her fingers trembling not with doubt, but with anticipation. Within minutes, the screen revealed more than Hudson had ever confessed. There were restaurant charges at places they had never dined together, hotel bills for single nights in the city, always on dates when he had claimed to be working late or traveling for client meetings. Jewelry purchases she had never seen far too extravagant to be gifts for his own wife. Gladys opened a folder she had already prepared on her desktop, labeled Baby Planning. Inside, she created subfolders and began saving screenshots neatly categorized by month and expense type. Each file name carried a date, a place, and the undeniable proof of his betrayal. Her next stop was the phone bill. Hudson was careless, perhaps too confident in her loyalty to think she would ever check. Dozens of calls to Florence's number stood out like stains on an otherwise clean sheet, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the middle of the workday, sometimes in clusters that suggested frantic exchanges. The messages were harder to see hidden behind privacy protections, but the frequency alone painted a damning picture. Gladys highlighted every call, exported the logs, and dropped them into another folder. The evidence was stacking higher, and with each click, she felt her old fear harden into something sharper, steadier. But digital records were only one piece. She needed more, something alive, something that would cut through the lies when the time came to strike. That afternoon, she drove to the library, not their neighborhood branch, where people knew her but 1-2 towns away. There, she researched surveillance laws and quietly purchased a small recording device from an electronics store on the way back. She told the clerk it was for capturing her unborn baby's kicks against her belly, a keepsake for later years. The man smiled and wished her luck. If only he knew. That night, when Hudson kissed her forehead and whispered that he would be late again, she only smiled and asked him not to overwork himself. As soon as he left, she placed the device under the side table near the living room couch, one of the places Hudson always lingered for phone calls. Later, when she played it back, she heard the unmistakable low rumble of his voice. He spoke Florence's name twice. He said things like, "She's starting to ask questions, and we need to be more careful." Each phrase was short-clipped, as though he already suspected the walls might be listening. Gladys smiled in the dark. He was right. The following week, she staged her own test. She casually mentioned to Hudson that Florence had been acting strangely more secretive than usual, as if she were hiding something. Hudson's jaw had tightened instantly, his hand gripping his coffee mug too hard. He muttered something about not prying into other people's lives. That reaction alone had been worth recording, and she had captured every word. She filed it away alongside the bank statements and phone logs, the digital trail of a man who had underestimated his wife. Slowly, the folder on her laptop became a fortress. credit card statements, screenshots of Florence's social media posts with suspiciously cropped images, audio recordings of late-night phone calls where Hudson's tone softened in ways it never did with her anymore. Each piece alone was suspicious. Together they formed a chain that could strangle any defense he tried to mount. Gladys knew this was not only about betrayal. It was about survival, hers and her baby's. Hudson had already wished for a miscarriage as though it were a convenient solution. She would not leave her son's future in the hands of a man willing to gamble with his life for his own freedom. She was building a shield, yes, but also a sword. When the moment came, Hudson would have nowhere to run. Late one evening, as she organized the files into a timeline, Gladys felt the baby kick for the first time that day. She pressed her hand against her belly and whispered, "Don't worry, little one. Mommy is making sure no one will ever hurt you." The movement settled her. This was no longer just a plan for revenge. It was a vow to her son. Hudson and Florence thought they were the only ones writing the story. They didn't realize Gladys had already picked up the pen and was scripting the ending herself. By the time Hudson's key turned in the lock, she had closed her laptop and set a bowl of soup on the stove, the picture of a dutiful wife waiting for her tired husband. He smiled, oblivious, and kissed her cheek. "Smells wonderful," he said. Gladys returned the smile, her eyes calm, her voice steady. Inside, she already held the power to dismantle his world. And soon, very soon, she would. By the middle of the week, Gladys knew she had enough evidence to crush Hudson in court. But evidence wasn't her only goal. She wanted truth spoken out loud with no room for denial. And for that, she needed a stage. The annual dinner party they hosted for Hudson's colleagues had always been a polished tradition, a chance to display their home, their charm, their seemingly perfect marriage. This year it would serve a different purpose. Gladys would turn it into a theater where every smile, every glance, every slip of the tongue could expose the truth. She began her preparations with meticulous care, starting with the guest list. When Hudson casually suggested canceling, claiming she shouldn't stress while pregnant, she smiled and insisted that it would be good practice for entertaining with a baby on the way. He hesitated, then agreed. That hesitation told her he already sensed danger. Perfect. She called Florence the next morning, her tone warm, inviting impossible to decline. "It would mean so much if you came," she said sweetly. "You've been such a rock for me. Hudson and I would love to have you there." On the other end of the line, Florence faltered. There was a pause, the faint sound of her breathing catching before she finally said, "If you're sure it won't be awkward." Gladys smiled as she traced circles over her belly. "Of course not. It will be wonderful." From that moment, every detail became part of her trap. The seating arrangement placed Florence directly across from Hudson, close enough to betray themselves with nervous glances, but too far to whisper in secret. Gladys positioned herself at the head of the table, the queen of her castle, with full view of both their faces. She planned the menu carefully. Hudson's favorite short ribs, roasted vegetables, the chocolate tart that had once charmed his boss's wife, comfort foods that would lure him into a false sense of security. If he thought the night was about his career, his image, his colleagues' admiration, he would lower his guard. On Saturday, the day of the party, the weather was unseasonably cool, the kind of crisp air that carried whispers of change. Gladys spent the morning in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, seasoning, every motion calm and deliberate. Florence arrived early, just as she had hoped. She looked stunning in a navy dress that hugged her pregnant frame, but her eyes carried shadows of sleepless nights. Gladys greeted her with genuine warmth, complimenting her appearance, guiding her into the kitchen where appetizers waited. Together they arranged crackers and cheeses, their movements practiced from years of friendship. But now every word, every hesitation was measured. Florence Gladys asked softly as she placed olives into a bowl, "Have you thought about what you'll tell your baby about their father when they're older?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Florence's hands trembled. Her face drained of color. "I'm not sure yet," she whispered. Gladys continued arranging the platter as if she hadn't noticed her tone casual. "Children are curious, and with our babies so close in age, they'll probably ask questions. I'd hate for it to be awkward, one father present and the other absent." Florence's voice cracked. "Maybe the father won't be absent." Gladys turned, feigning mild surprise. "Oh, so there's hope for reconciliation." Florence hesitated, eyes darting toward the door, as if waiting for Hudson to rescue her. "It's complicated," she murmured. Gladys leaned in, her voice gentle but sharp as glass. "It always is when other relationships are on the line." Before Florence could answer, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Hudson's colleagues. The spell was broken, but Gladys knew she had pushed Florence to the edge. The evening unfolded with laughter, handshakes, and the clinking of wine glasses. Gladys played the perfect hostess, guiding conversations, making sure every guest felt comfortable. But beneath her smile, she studied the tension across the table. Hudson fidgeted with his napkin whenever Florence spoke. Florence avoided his gaze, staring instead into her glass of water. Gladys steered the conversation deliberately. "I don't know what I would have done without Florence during the early weeks of my pregnancy," she announced brightly. "She was here almost every morning, making sure I ate, keeping me company when Hudson had to work late. Sometimes she spent more time with him than I did." The room grew quiet. Hudson's fork clattered against his plate, and Florence's face went pale. Patricia, one of the wives, tried to fill the silence with a story about her own pregnancy, but the damage was done. People had noticed the tension, the two quick glances, the way both Florence and Hudson seemed rattled. Gladys's trap was tightening, and they were wriggling like flies in a web. Later, while guests enjoyed dessert, Florence slipped into the kitchen, her composure crumbling. "I can't do this," she whispered urgently. "Gladys, I can't sit there and pretend." Gladys poured coffee, her movement steady. Pretend what she asked, though she knew exactly. Florence's eyes filled with tears. "You know, don't you? You've known all along." Gladys set down the pot and met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "I heard you at the hospital," she said softly. "Every word." Florence collapsed into a chair, sobbing, confessing fragments between breaths, how it started, how she hated herself, how Hudson promised the marriage was already over. Her words spilled out like poison finely drawn from a wound. Gladys listened silent, letting Florence damn herself with her own mouth. In the dining room, laughter continued as Hudson entertained his colleagues, unaware that the walls of his life were closing in. When the last guest departed and the house fell quiet, Hudson tried to smile, loading the dishwasher, as though nothing had changed. "That was nice," he said. "Everyone seemed to have a good time." Gladys tilted her head, her voice soft, but edged with steel. Florence seemed upset. Hudson shrugged. "Pregnant women get emotional. It's probably nothing." But Gladys knew it was everything. She had drawn the truth out, set the stage, and forced Florence to reveal her guilt. And Hudson. He was already playing defense without realizing the game was nearly over. That night, as she lay in bed beside him, Gladys pressed her hand to her belly. Her son shifted gently beneath her skin, as if reminding her of the stakes. Hudson thought the night had gone well, that his secrets were still safe. But Gladys smiled in the darkness. The stage was set. The curtain was rising. And soon, very soon, the performance would end with Hudson and Florence exposed for exactly who they were. By Sunday morning, the tension in the Smith household felt like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Hudson sat at the breakfast table, staring into his coffee, his tie loose around his neck, though it was barely past 8. He had dark circles under his eyes, and for once his usual calm veneer had cracks. Gladys moved around the kitchen with deliberate ease, placing plates, slicing fruit, pretending not to notice his unease. Inside, she was savoring it. Every shift in his posture, every sigh was proof that her plan was working. The night before had rattled him. She had seen it in the way he avoided her eyes after the guests left, the way he kept his voice too casual when he mentioned Florence. She was probably just tired, he had muttered, as if exhaustion could explain the way Florence's hands had trembled over her fork, or the way her eyes had brimmed with tears. Gladys hadn't argued. She didn't need to. Hudson was unraveling on his own. That morning she made her first call to Eleanor Hudson's mother. Her voice was soft, worried, perfectly pitched to strike the balance between vulnerable daughter-in-law and frightened wife. "Eleanor, I don't know what to do," she whispered into the phone. "Hudson has been so distant lately, staying out late, looking trapped whenever I talk about the baby. I'm scared he doesn't want this child." She let her breath hitch, let silence hang heavy. Eleanor's sharp intake of air was all she needed. "That doesn't sound like my son," Eleanor said firmly, but there was doubt already threading her voice. Gladys added the final needle. "I probably shouldn't say this, but last night Florence seemed to know more about Hudson's moods than I did. They shared these looks I can't explain. I keep telling myself I'm imagining things, but—" She trailed off, letting implication do the work. Eleanor promised to speak to Hudson immediately. Gladys hung up smiling to herself. Her second call was to Owen Hudson's younger brother. She used a similar tactic, weaving worry with innocence. "I don't want to start rumors," she said, "but I've noticed Hudson has been spending time away from home. With Florence being so secretive about her pregnancy, sometimes I wonder if they're hiding something." Owen, protective by nature, immediately grew suspicious. "If he's hurting you, Gladys, you'll tell me." "Right." She assured him she was fine, but left enough unsaid to plant roots of doubt. By noon, Hudson's phone was buzzing non-stop. He tried to act irritated, pacing the living room with sharp movements, but Gladys heard the panic in his clipped responses. His mother, his siblings, even a cousin or two had started circling, asking questions, pressing for answers. He slammed his phone down on the counter. "What did you say to them?" he demanded, his voice tight. Gladys widened her eyes with practiced innocence. "I told them I was worried about you. Isn't that what family is for?" His jaw clenched and he stormed into his office, slamming the door. Meanwhile, Florence was collapsing under her own pressure. That afternoon, she appeared at Gladys's doorstep, pale and trembling. "Hudson told me your family is asking questions," she blurted before she was even inside. "What did you do?" Gladys tilted her head, feigning confusion. "I only said I was worried about him." "Why, Florence? Is there something they should know?" Florence sank into the couch, her hands gripping her belly protectively. "This is spiraling out of control. People at work are starting to whisper. Someone left an anonymous note on my desk asking who the father is." Her voice broke into a sob. "I can't take this." Gladys sat across from her, her expression calm, her voice almost kind. "Secrets have a way of slipping into the light, Florence. Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to be honest." Florence buried her face in her hands, shaking. "You don't understand. If this comes out, I'll lose everything, my job, my reputation, my family's respect." Gladys reached forward and gently touched her arm. "You already risked all of that when you chose to betray me. You just didn't realize how high the cost would be." When Hudson returned that evening, his anger was barely contained. "You're poisoning everyone against me," he accused, his voice low and dangerous. Gladys met his glare without flinching. "I'm not poisoning anyone. I'm telling the truth. If that truth makes you look guilty, maybe you should ask yourself why." For the first time, Hudson had no response. He turned away, fists clenching, the weight of exposure pressing down on him. As Gladys lay in bed that night, the baby kicked steadily beneath her hand. The house felt heavy with silence, but she welcomed it. The whispers she had unleashed in the family and community were louder than any shouting match. Hudson and Florence were surrounded now, trapped in a tightening circle of suspicion. Gladys closed her eyes, her lips curving into the faintest smile. The storm had broken, and it was only the beginning. The days following the dinner party settled into a strange rhythm. On the surface, life appeared normal, Hudson going to work, Gladys cooking meals, Florence texting small talk as if nothing had changed. But underneath, currents of tension swirled faster each hour. Gladys could see it in Hudson's restless pacing at night, in Florence's scattered messages, in the way their carefully crafted lies were fraying. The net was closing, and both of them knew it. Gladys understood that suspicion alone wasn't enough. People whispered yes, but whispers could fade. What she needed was a confession, undeniable and unshakable, something that would collapse their defenses entirely. She considered how best to force it. Confronting them separately had cracked Florence's composure, but Hudson was slipperier, always ready with excuses and half-truths. Together, though, their guilt made them reckless. She just needed to maneuver them into the same room where their alliance would crumble under pressure. Her opportunity arrived sooner than expected. One afternoon, Florence texted nervously, "Can we talk? Just us?" Gladys stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Of course. Come over tonight." Then she called Hudson at work, her voice light. "Why don't we have dinner at home tonight? Just the three of us. Florence has been lonely. I think she could use the company." There was a long pause. Hudson cleared his throat. "Florence, here, yes," Gladys said smoothly. "She's been such a good friend. It feels wrong not to include her." Hudson tried to protest, mumbling something about privacy, and Florence being uncomfortable, but Gladys pressed. "If you're worried about appearances, what better way to quiet rumors than showing everyone we're still close friends?" Reluctantly, he agreed. Gladys smiled to herself. The trap was set. That evening, she prepared a simple meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables. Nothing extravagant, nothing to draw attention from what really mattered. She lit candles, creating a warm glow, a picture of domestic harmony. When Florence arrived, her eyes were rimmed red, her posture tense. Gladys embraced her, gently guiding her inside before Hudson returned. "Relax," she whispered. "No one's here but us." Hudson came home minutes later, his expression tightening the moment he saw Florence on the couch. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then Gladys clapped her hands lightly. "Let's eat." Dinner began with stilted conversation, Hudson asking about Florence's doctor appointments, Florence nodding her fork, barely lifting. Gladys watched carefully, noting the way Hudson avoided eye contact, the way Florence's hands shook. Finally, she set down her glass and spoke, her voice calm but firm. "We should stop pretending." Hudson froze. "Pretending what?" "That everything is normal," Gladys said. "That our friendship hasn't been poisoned. That this marriage isn't already broken." She turned to Florence. "Tell him what you told me in the kitchen the other night." Florence's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean. You said you wish things were different," Gladys pressed. "That you never meant for it to happen." "You were talking about Hudson, weren't you?" Hudson's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, voice sharp. "Gladys, stop this nonsense." But Florence crumbled under the weight of Gladys's steady gaze. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." The silence afterward was devastating. Hudson's face turned ashen. "Florence, don't—" "It's too late," Gladys cut in. "I already know. I heard you both at the hospital." "Every word." Hudson staggered back, eyes wide with horror. You were there." "Yes," Gladys said coldly. "I heard you hoping I'd lose our child. I heard you planning your future while mine collapsed." Florence sobbed openly. Now her hands pressed to her swollen stomach. "I told him it was wrong. I told him to end it." Hudson spun toward her, betrayal etched on his face. "You promised, and you promised me everything," Florence cried. Gladys rose slowly, her hand resting on her belly. "You both promised me loyalty, friendship, marriage. Instead, you gave me betrayal and lies. Tonight it ends." Neither spoke. Hudson's mouth opened, then shut, his body trembling as if words had finally failed him. Florence buried her face in her hands. Gladys looked at them both, once the closest people in her life, now reduced to frightened conspirators. She felt no pity, only clarity. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "Tomorrow my lawyer will contact you, Hudson. The evidence is already collected. You'll face me in court, and you'll face your family knowing exactly what you are. As for you, Florence, we will never be friends again, but for the sake of our children, I will be civil. That is all I can give." She left them in silence, retreating upstairs. Her son kicked gently as if in approval. The trap had closed, and there was no way out. The morning after the confrontation, the Smith household felt like a fragile glass about to shatter. Hudson sat at the breakfast table, staring at his coffee, his tie hanging loose, his face drained of color. Gladys moved calmly around the kitchen, setting plates, slicing fruit, her hand resting occasionally on her belly. Outwardly, she looked serene. Inwardly, she was sharpening every blade of her strategy. The time for suspicion and whispers had ended. Now she would show Hudson what it meant to underestimate her. Her first move was legal. As soon as Hudson left for the office, she called Janet Morrison, the divorce attorney she had carefully researched. Janet's tone was brisk and decisive. "With the evidence you've gathered, recordings, receipts, phone logs, we can file for adultery. That gives you leverage over custody assets and support. I'll draft the petition today." Gladys agreed, her voice calm, though her pulse thrummed with adrenaline. "I want full custody of my son, and I want Hudson to feel the consequences." Janet promised swift action. By lunchtime, the documents were ready to serve. Her second move was social. She opened the laptop that had become her war chest. Folders neatly labeled with dates contained screenshots of Florence's messages, hotel bills, and photographs of Hudson's car parked outside Florence's building. Most damaging of all was the audio recording Hudson's voice confessing that Florence carried his child, dismissing his wife's pregnancy as a burden. Gladys attached selected files to emails addressed to Hudson's partners, key clients, and a handful of acquaintances skilled in spreading news. Her message was brief. "I thought you should know the kind of man you are dealing with." With a single click, she unleashed the truth like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, the phone in Hudson's office was ringing non-stop. His assistant fielded angry calls from clients. One partner left a voicemail that Gladys later replayed. "Hudson, this is unacceptable. Until these allegations are resolved, consider yourself suspended." The words were ice in Hudson's ears, but sweet music to Gladys. His career, the pillar of his pride, was crumbling in real time. That evening he came home visibly shaken. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie discarded, his steps heavy. He dropped his briefcase with a thud and demanded, "What did you do?" Gladys didn't look up from the papers she was arranging. "I told the truth," she said evenly. "If the truth destroys you, perhaps you should ask why." Hudson's voice cracked. "You've ruined me. The firm is finished with me. My clients won't return my calls. You've taken everything." Gladys finally met his eyes, her expression cold. "I didn't take anything. You threw it all away. I only made sure people saw it clearly." The next day his family began calling her instead of him. "Eleanor," his mother spoke in a voice taut with disbelief. "Is it true Florence's baby? Is it his?" Gladys let a silence linger before answering. "I didn't want to believe it either, but yes, I have proof." Eleanor wept openly. Later, Hudson's brother Owen called his anger sharp. "He betrayed you, and he betrayed this family. Don't worry, we'll stand with you." Each conversation stripped Hudson of support. One by one, the people he counted on turned their backs. Florence, meanwhile, was unraveling. She sent Gladys long messages filled with apologies, pleas for understanding, promises that she never meant to cause so much harm. Gladys responded only once. "For the sake of our children, I'll be civil. But our friendship is over." After that, she ignored every attempt at reconciliation. Florence's silence grew heavier each day, and Gladys knew her former friend was crumbling under the weight of shame. At Janet's office, the divorce papers were finalized. Gladys's demands were precise: 70% of marital assets, the house in her name full custody, with supervised visitation, and $5,000 a month in spousal support. Janet reviewed the evidence again and nodded. "He has no defense. He'll surrender before trial." Gladys exhaled steady. "Good. Let him know what it feels like to lose everything he values." That evening, Hudson returned with a lawyer of his own, a nervous man named Carter. They sat in the living room with folders spread across the coffee table. Carter tried to sound firm, suggesting a modest settlement, but Gladys quietly handed him a USB drive. Inside were recordings, photographs, bank statements, all organized in brutal detail. Carter's face blanched as he scrolled. "This is comprehensive," he admitted. Hudson glared at Gladys, desperation seeping through his anger. "You're destroying me," he said. Gladys leaned forward, her voice steady as stone. "No, Hudson. You destroyed yourself the day you chose betrayal over loyalty, the day you wished harm on our child. I'm simply ensuring you live with the consequences." The room went silent, the weight of her words undeniable. Hudson lowered his head, defeated, while Gladys placed her hand gently on her belly. Her son kicked a quiet reminder of why this war mattered. For the first time, Hudson realized there was no path back. His fall had only begun, and Gladys would make sure it ended with nothing left for him to hold. Florence sat at her kitchen table, staring at a half-packed box. Around her, the apartment looked less like a home and more like a battlefield littered with abandoned memories. Empty frames leaned against the wall. Clothes were stuffed into bags without care. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air, thick and bitter. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering to the child inside, "I'm trying, sweetheart. I really am." But her voice broke, and the words dissolved into silence. Just a week earlier, Florence had walked into her office expecting another ordinary day. Instead, her boss was waiting with a stack of papers and an expression of disappointment. Copies of her text messages with Hudson had landed on his desk, intimate lines that exposed not only the affair, but also her role in destroying a marriage. "We can't have this scandal tied to our firm," he told her flatly. "Pack your things." Her protests went unheard. By noon, she was unemployed, her colleagues whispering behind her back as she left. The walk through the lobby felt endless, every step echoing her shame. The news spread quickly. Friends who once filled her weekends with brunches and laughter now ignored her calls. A neighbor who used to smile and wave now crossed the hall without meeting her eyes. Even her own parents, supportive by nature, urged her to return to Oregon quietly. "You need a fresh start," her mother said gently. Florence heard the unspoken truth. "We don't want this disgrace in our backyard." The loneliness cut deeper than she imagined. Nights were the worst. She would lie awake scrolling through her phone, rereading Hudson's old messages, promises that they would build a family together, plans for houses, vacations, futures, all of it gone, replaced by silence. Hudson barely returned her calls now. He was drowning in his own collapse, and she was nothing but an anchor dragging him lower. The man who once swore he would protect her had left her to face the wreckage alone. Desperate, she drove to Gladys's house one evening, clutching a small stuffed animal she had bought for the baby. She stood on the porch for several minutes before knocking, rehearsing apologies in her mind. When Gladys opened the door, Florence's heart cracked at the sight of the woman holding her son. The baby's small fingers curled around Gladys's blouse, his face serene. Florence's own child shifted in her womb, as if reminding her of what she had lost before she even held it. "I just wanted to see you," Florence whispered. "To see him." Gladys didn't invite her inside. She didn't slam the door either. Her voice was calm, steady. "He's doing well. We're both doing well." Florence's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. I know it means nothing now, but I never meant to destroy us. You were my best friend. I thought—" She broke off, choking on the weight of her words. Gladys's gaze was unflinching. "Best friends don't sleep with each other's husbands. Best friends don't plan betrayals while pretending to offer comfort. You made your choice, Florence, and now you live with it." Her tone softened slightly. "For the sake of our children, I'll be civil. But we'll never be friends again." Florence nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She placed the stuffed animal on the porch railing. "For him," she said softly. "Maybe he'll never know it came from me." "That's probably better." Then she turned and walked away, her shoulders heavy, her steps unsteady. Back inside, Gladys placed the toy in a drawer, unsure if she would ever give it to her son. Florence's figure disappeared into the night, swallowed by shadows. She had lost her job, her reputation, her friend, and the man she believed would stand beside her. All that remained was the child she carried, innocent of the choices that had shattered so many lives. For Florence, the fall was complete. She was no longer a rival, no longer a friend, no longer anything but a reminder of betrayal's cost. And as she drove toward an uncertain future, tears blurring the road ahead, she realized that some mistakes don't just break lives, they erase them. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where lives were rewritten in ink and verdicts. Gladys sat tall at her lawyer's table, her hand resting on the stroller beside her. Her son slept peacefully, unaware of the storm his mother was navigating. Across the aisle, Hudson looked worn down. His suit rumpled his face hollow. He avoided her eyes, focusing instead on the stack of papers in front of his lawyer. The judge's voice was steady as he reviewed the case. "We have before us evidence of infidelity, reckless behavior, and disregard for the well-being of the family. We also have the mother's documented preparation, stability, and commitment." Each word was a nail hammered into Hudson's defense. Gladys remained calm, her face composed though her heart raced. She thought of the nights spent gathering files of the conversations where Hudson and Florence exposed themselves. Every sleepless hour had brought her here. When the ruling came, it was swift and final. Full custody awarded to Gladys, spousal support of $5,000 per month, Hudson granted supervised visitation once a week, contingent on counseling. The division of assets heavily favored her the home and savings secured under her name. Hudson's lawyer attempted a weak protest, but the judge silenced him with a glance. "This court will not reward betrayal," he declared. The gavel struck, and with it the old life ended. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Gladys shielded her son from the cameras, offering no comment. She didn't need to. The story had already spread. Hudson Smith, once a respected lawyer, exposed as an adulterer whose downfall was both legal and public. Florence, absent from the proceedings, had quietly left the city, too ashamed to face the glare of judgment. That evening Gladys stood on the porch of her home, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in gold. The house no longer felt like a cage built by Hudson's ambitions. It was hers now, every brick reclaimed, every room a promise for her son's future. She breathed deeply, letting the cool air wash over her, and whispered, "We made it." The baby stirred in his stroller, tiny fists stretching as if reaching for tomorrow. Hudson, meanwhile, sat alone in a rented apartment on the far side of town. Boxes of legal books and framed certificates lay stacked in a corner, reminders of a career he could no longer claim. His phone buzzed with unanswered calls, debts piling as quickly as his shame. For the first time in years, there was no one left to shield him, no Florence to whisper promises, no family to defend him. The silence pressed heavy on his chest, and he realized what he had lost could never be rebuilt. Days turned into weeks. Gladys adjusted to motherhood, her routines filled with midnight feedings and lullabies, but also with peace she had not felt in years. Friends returned, offering meals, laughter, and encouragement. Her family visited often, surrounding her with love. Slowly, the cracks in her heart began to heal. She even started writing again, journals filled with lessons, stories, and hopes for the future. One afternoon, she opened her laptop and began a letter addressed to her son. "You were born in the middle of a storm," she wrote. "But storms do not last forever. They clear the sky so the sun can shine brighter. You are that sun, my light, my reason." She closed the file and smiled, knowing that one day he would understand the strength it took to protect him. Hudson faded from relevance. At the firm, his name was erased from the door. In the community, he became a cautionary tale whispered at gatherings. Florence's whereabouts were uncertain. Some said she returned to Oregon, others that she lived quietly in another state. Neither mattered to Gladys anymore. Their roles in her story were finished. On a quiet Sunday morning, Gladys pushed her son's stroller down the neighborhood path. The world seemed gentler now, the trees greener, the air lighter, the future brighter. Neighbors smiled, children waved, and she felt a sense of belonging she thought she had lost. She whispered softly, "We're free." For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. And as the sun rose higher, Gladys knew the story of betrayal and revenge had given birth to something greater hope. In the end, Gladys's journey reminds us of an eternal truth. Betrayal may cut deeply, but justice has a way of restoring balance. The Bible tells us in Galatians 6:7, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap." Hudson and Florence sowed lies, deceit, and selfishness. In return, they reaped the bitter harvest of shame and loss. Gladys, though broken for a time, chose wisdom and perseverance. By gathering her strength and protecting her child, she showed that faith and courage can turn even the darkest betrayals into new beginnings. As a Western proverb says, "The axe forgets, but the tree remembers." The betrayers may wish to move on quickly, but the wounded never forget, and sometimes remembering becomes the very source of power to rise above. Gladys's strength lay not in blind rage, but in calculated patience, in refusing to let anger consume her while ensuring justice was served. This is why audiences connect with true revenge stories like this one. They carry more than drama. They carry lessons about choices, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. For every listener, the story of Gladys becomes a mirror, reminding us to value trust, to guard our hearts, and to believe that consequences always find their way home. So now, dear viewers, I leave you with this thought. Revenge may close the chapter, but truth and resilience write the final page.